In this video, we're going to talk about sketch options and settings. Most of these are found in the Tools Options dialog. Options is off your screen at this point. You may also find it using the gear icon. The sketch settings are right here, and they are part of the system options for Solidworks. That means that they will only affect your computer. They won't travel with the files to other computers. Let's take a look at how some of these settings work. The first setting I'd like to look at is Auto Rotate View Normal to Sketch Plane on Sketch Creation and Sketch Edit. This is turned on by default when you have SolidWorks installed, and if I create a new sketch, select a plane, notice that SolidWorks swings the plane around normal to the view. Sometimes this is a good thing and sometimes it's not. If you need to reference something in the background that you can't see from dead-on view, you might want to leave that setting off. Personally, I like to have the setting turned off, so I'm going to switch mine to be off. Use fully defined sketches. A lot of people are tempted to use this because, of course, fully defined sketches are usually called best practice. But there are some times when you can't fully define a sketch without also over-defining it, or it would just take a long time to make a lot of unnecessary relationships and or dimensions. For example, if you're using a spline, or you have just a huge sketch. Maybe you've converted some text entities, or there are many ways to get a huge sketch that you can't really fully define. You just have to be careful when you're editing it not to move entities that shouldn't be moved. For me, I will leave this turned off. It comes off by default, but if you turn it on, just remember that there may be times when you won't be allowed to get out of your sketch because you've got something that's not fully defined. You can just pop back in here, turn this off, and get out of the sketch. Display arc center points in part and assembly sketches. I think this is important to have on. If you have a lot of arcs on your sketch, it can clutter the display, but I think it's worth having this setting turned on. Display entity points in part and assembly sketches. Let's take a look at this both on and off. If I draw a line, some people get distracted by these endpoints on the line, which I don't understand, because if you have two lines that are collinear, then and those points aren't there, then you wouldn't understand that there's something else in there. Or if you have another line that's totally collinear, for example, inside, you don't know that it's overlapping in there. So if we were to go back and turn that setting off, this is what it would look like. I'll turn off the arc center points too, so you can see what that's like. Okay, it just looks like one line, even though we know that it's really 4 lines, or 3 anyway. Let's take a look at some of the arcs. Here's a circle with it has the center point as long as it's selected, but as soon as you deselect it, there's no center point. And the same thing with a regular arc. It's selected, it shows, but when it's deselected, you can't see that or find it with the cursor. So both of these settings I would recommend turning on. The setting for prompt to close sketch is not very clear at all what it's talking about. I can explain it to you here. If it's turned on, then I have a sketch here that has, this is an open sketch, so 3 lines, there's no line across the bottom. If I go to extrude this, SolidWorks puts up this arrow, and this arrow is just because of that prompt to close sketch switch. You can press the space bar or the enter bar, and SolidWorks will add that line for you and then extrude a solid feature. Okay, now I'm going to X out of this and Control Z to undo. So now that line is gone. And if I extrude again, I get that arrow again, but I hit escape this time. This time it's trying to extrude a thin feature because there is no line across this edge. It's not a closed sketch. So because the term closed or open sketch has multiple meanings in SolidWorks, this is kind of confusing, and the prompt isn't really very descriptive as to what your actions should be. So if you want to close the sketch, hit spacebar or enter. If you don't want to close this sketch, press escape. But as for me and my house, we will turn off the prompt to close sketch. Okay, create sketch on new part. When you open a new part from a template, if this is on, SolidWorks is automatically going to open up a new sketch for you. I turn that off. If that's what you always do when you open an existing file or open a new file, then go ahead and use it. Override dimensions on drag. Okay, this is a good practical joke that you can play on somebody. Say I've got a sketch and I fully define that sketch and I've got a couple of dimensions and the sketch turns fully black. So I make this 20 and I make this 50. Okay. Now I have that setting turned on. Now if I grab a fully defined sketch line, I can still drag it and the dimension updates. And this is without using the Instant 2D tool. Instant 2D does something else, and we'll talk about that in a different video where we talk about sketch tools. So this is the sketch setting called Override Dims on Drag. You could turn that on somebody's machine and watch them freak out when you drag their fully defined sketches. Display plane when shaded. Okay, this means that it's going to display the sketch plane when your model is shaded and you're sketching. Okay, so if you turn it on and open a new sketch, your screen is going to look like it grays out. If you also have the grid shown, it may be a little more obvious of what's going on. I recommend turning this off. As long as you can see the red origin, you know where your sketch plane is, and you don't need to have the sketch plane shaded, which is what this is talking about. Okay, line length measured between virtual sharps in 3D. So if you have a 3D sketch, which I'm not going to demonstrate here, but you have a 3D sketch and then have fillets between, say, lines on a 3D sketch, SolidWorks will put dimensions in that go to the virtual sharps instead of just the ends of the lines. I think that's a good one to have on. Just remember it's turned on, so when you're in a 3D sketch and put some fillets and you see dimensions going to nowhere, you'll know what that means. Enable spline tangency and curvature handles. So this is talking about enabling the handles, not enabling the tangency. Okay, so the handles are definitely something that you want to have on. If those are off, then it makes it very difficult to work with splines at all. So what we're talking about by spline handles and tangency is these controls out at the end that'll help you control the direction and the tangency strength. And these will also show up on individual control points so that you can adequately control your spline. So this setting, enable spline tangency and curvature handles, needs to be turned on. Show spline control polygon by default. This is something I would not turn on, but some people might want to have it turned on. You can turn it on individually by right-clicking on a spline, and it's off the screen here for you, but the show spline handles is one of the options, and show the display control polygon. Okay, if you have a style spline, that's going to mean something else, but here your control polygon just gives you an additional way to control and manipulate a spline in a sketch. So I would turn that off because the spline display can get quite confusing, but you can turn these on as necessary. Ghost image on drag has saved my bacon so many times, I can't tell you. The ghost image on drag does this, especially with a spline. If you start out working, you can always tell where you started out, because sometimes you make edits, and while you're dragging your sketch entity around, you kind of lose track, or you make something that's just not feasible, that you don't want. So you can always put it back where it came from, roughly. While you're editing, if you press escape, it'll pop off of the cursor and just drop back to where it went from. So ghost image on drag is a go. Show curvature comb bounding curve. Okay, I like to turn this one on. Let me show you why. On a spline, if you right click and show curvature comb, which is off the screen for you, the bounding curve is this spline that goes around out here. Now sometimes this gets a little bit crazy. I like to have it because if you don't have it, this is what it looks like. It just looks, I mean, it's hard to see probably on the screen, but it's just spikes on a spline. And if you don't have your density turned up very high, this is, I mean, it's not very useful. The problem that you'll get sometimes is if you have a very tight change in curvature, sometimes the spline will go out and then double in on itself and start to go backwards. And that's just something that you have to understand and know how to deal with. And I don't think it's a reason to turn this off just because it has a quirk that shows up from time to time. Okay, so I would definitely use the show curvature comb bounding curve if you ever work with splines and curvature combs. Scale sketch on first dimension creation. This can be a really nice thing. Sometimes your default template comes up and you draw a line and then you give it a giant dimension that should shoot off the screen. Solidworks will automatically resize the display, and so all of that sketch entity gets on the screen. I think that's a great thing to have. I like it. Keep it turned on. Enable on-screen numeric input on entity creation. Now this is kind of a controversial one, I think. There are times when I like it, there are times when I don't, but I think I don't like it more than I do like it, if that makes any sense. And there are certain settings where this works better than others. So enable on-screen numeric input on entity creation, and along with that, you get the option to create dimension only when value is entered. So that's a lot of options. Let's take a look at what that really means. Control A and delete. Okay, the way this setting works is that if I were to draw a rectangle, this works better with click sketching than it does with click drag. So I'm going to click and release the first point of my rectangle and then move the cursor to the other point. You can see that I have a data input box here, so I can key in 7, and then the other one comes up and I can put in 10. All right, now it doesn't give me any dimensions on this, but the second option, create dimension only when value is entered, that will allow the dimension to actually be created. So let's go through this again. Click, move, key, 5, 8, enter, and this time it created the dimensions because of that setting. So if you're somebody that dimensions everything that you sketch, this is a great setting. Both of these settings are something that you'll want to use. The overdefining dimensions are typically set to prompt to set to driven state. The first setting actually prompts you to set the state, and the second setting automatically sets it to default. You can use either one of these or use them in combination. I personally don't like either one of them. If I overdefine something, it might be because I'm going to overdefine it and then delete something else. If you've got these settings set and you've overdefined a sketch, then it just sets it to driven, and you're going to have to set it back to driving later on. I like to turn both of those off. Turn off automatic solve mode and undo when sketch contains more than this number of sketch entities. That's just something that they put in there for giant sketches. When you're making edits to giant sketches, sometimes the performance can bog down a lot. These things typically happen when you have imported drawings or you have sketches that are created automatically. Hide missing geometry error for suppressed dimensions. SolidWorks users in general are error phobic. I mean, if there's something wrong, you don't want to know about it. So a lot of people, will turn something like this on. In assemblies, that's especially true. I would keep this off personally. If there's something wrong, I want the software to tell me about it. These are the sketch settings. Those are my recommendations, and I hope you enjoy working with sketches in SolidWorks.